Welcome to another episode of the Alley Report. Today we're talking with Adam Hulse, author of Below Economic Thresholds, The Growth, Not a Good Fit This Time, and founder, CEO, and dear leader of Infested Publishing. Uh, yeah, so thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, like when I think about your writing specifically, what I love about it is regardless of the genre of the horror you're writing about, sci-fi, horror, or mix, it's always about the working class and just what everyday people have to go through. And
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Um, I took a little bit of time to sort of get towards that. Uh, but one thing I've sort of got from a lot of writers that I respect and appreciate is that obviously we all want to find our voice. And I just thought it was a sort of stylistic thing. But I think as I've sort of hit my stride a little bit, it's more about what makes us tick because if you're sort of writing from your soul, you're not going to be unhappy. Sure, people might not sort of, you're not going to get everyone reading your stuff, and I'd love more people to read my books, but the process of me actually writing them is probably now as good as I've ever had it because I'm writing sort of what interests me, what inspires me, what entertains me, rather than just really I was just sort of writing to entertain. I think I'm getting a sort of good balance of all that now.
okay, yeah, you're finding like what moves you essentially, like what
Yeah,
like
yeah, definitely. I think some good advice early on that I got was to sort of write what you would like to read. Um, so it was quite action packed, sort of creature feature sort of stuff from
yeah.
the get go. But I wasn't really sort of saying anything. There was the odd sort of layer to it that I like to do, but I think a lot of that first time round sort of was missed because it was possibly a little bit too subtle. Whereas now, like I'm quite openly sort of fighting the good fight for the working classes.
which, which I love, and especially like below economic thresholds. I don't want to spoil anything because hope everybody listening and read and watching this reads that one. But the fact that this is a world where there's been an incursion by these demonic entities or whatever, and for the everyday people, that's like the least of your worries. Like
Yeah,
where's your next meal going to come from? You have a corrupt government that serves only the wealthy, and it's just it's now, but like 5 or 6 years down the road is kind of how I viewed it. Like with
yeah,
demons.
yeah, exactly. I think a lot of the feedback that I got, which I really appreciated, was that it wasn't sort of, even though there was demons in there, and even though sort of, the cities were sort of half rubble, half sort of wreckage, that people were sort of saying, when the worrying thing about it and the thing that scares them is that it didn't seem too far fetched.
Yeah,
Um, and that was kind of what I was going for, was this sort of what I called at the time sort of Orwellian horror, which it was just this sort of down and out sort of feeling of struggling anyway. Um, you know, struggling to get through, being doing a really sort of dangerous job for the paymasters and just getting sort of a
yeah,
tin of beans as like a payment. And there's sort of a lot of sort of frustrations in my own working life that was sort of put into it. And I think a lot of people got that. I get that some people don't want to read these kind of things because they read for escapism. But I
yeah.
do think there's enough sort of adventure and entertainment and action in my work that you do get that. I don't see why you can't sort of say something politically, because I have seen on sort of Twitter a lot at the moment. There's been this discourse of reviewers and a few reviewers and a few writers sort of saying, if you're saying something politically, I won't have anything to do with you. And I just think, well, you don't really sound like anyone that I'd associate with
Yeah.
anyway.
Like
Um,
you sound those kind of people sound like the kind of I couldn't say what I think of those kind of people because YouTube censors and whatnot. But
yeah,
but yeah, and also it kills me because they say that, but then when you look at like the greatest work in horror genre, any genre really, like it's unabashedly political. Like Stephen
Yeah,
King is political. Like it's like when you write about everyday life and everyday people, it's yeah, we're constantly under the thumb of of politics, of
yeah,
decisions made by
exactly.
people who make more money than we'll ever see to protect other
Yeah,
people who make more money than we'll ever see.
yeah, exactly. If yourself as a writer, if you're developing a character, that character is only going to resonate with the reader because they have a set of problems that they're either going to fix during the narrative, or it's just the baggage that they carry with them. Now, those problems are usually going to be because of some sort of social situation that they find themselves in, not having enough money, um, you know, uh, sort of having to do something out of the comfort zone to try and get the money for sort of medication, or there's all these sort of things. um so you I think a lot of people who sort of make these blanket statements probably don't realize that a lot of the literature, and even cinema that they absolutely love, is completely motivated politically. They just don't realize that
Yeah,
you
they
know
put their head that far in the sand.
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I'd love to just walk away. The thing is personally, I don't even have to watch the news. I don't, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, if it bums you out, don't watch it, and things like that. But my life as a working class man in a town that's sort of degrading and not getting enough funding, there's no escape. There's no escape
Yeah,
from these conditions. And well, I say there is no escape. The key escape is the arts. The key escape is the writing. It's the whole reason why I write. It's my motivation. It's the therapy. It's the keeping. It's why people used to keep journals all the time. Now I write these stories, and there's a big piece of my soul in there that sort of I'm setting free to sort of escape this.
yeah.
And I think that's the case for most writers I know.
I mean, yeah, same like most of my stuff has to do with like you know poverty, small towns, just inherent racism, just all the things I see around me.
Well,
Like,
I always find with your work, Alfred, is that there's always this sort of, really grounded. Your characters are always like, you get like family units that are, even if sometimes dysfunctional, it's realistic, and it has sort of deep sort of roots in where you can sort of tell that a writer has sort of lived through things, and it makes it so much more believable. And when you get that, that allows the sort of scares and the laughs to sort of have bigger impacts, because as a reader you're invested in those characters. And I always, I think you do that wonderfully. And again, that is because of a sort of um a social sort of commentary. I think
yeah,
most people have social commentary without being recognized for it, um, which again sort of is sort of two fingers up in the air to the people that say you shouldn't have it in. It's ridiculous.
yeah, no, I agree. And then thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that. And
Welcome.
when you talked about going back and like looking at your work or redoing it, the growth got a big update. It got a major overhaul recently.
Yeah, yeah. It was something was bugging with that bugged me, and that was about naming publishers. My sort of early naive um, relationship with a publisher wasn't great. It was something exciting as a new writer, and it was something immediate. When I first released, I released. I wrote a novel in lockdown because I felt like I was losing my mind. I felt I had to do something sort of productive because everything was out of control, and I was just I didn't want to waste that sort of time spent at home. And that's I read I wrote the Tales of Tapuka, which was essentially what was released as the Cursed Caves and the Cursed Creatures. So I actually wrote a novel, and then the only sort of publisher I sort of naively sort of scattergun sort of tried to get an agent straight from the get go, and um, funny thing was that most of them were sort of in America and who specialized in horror. And I just remember it used to be like a sort of weekly thing where after a few months, it became a weekly thing where I'd sort of get up like in the early hours of the morning, look at my phone, and I'd have like a sort of polite no thank you off an agent. And it just went on and on. And the sort of only bite I got with this publisher, but unfortunately, they only really wanted to publish series of novellas. So straight away, I was sort of asked to sort of split something down the middle, and then can you write a third book? And then um, by that time afterwards, I got approached by them to write a sort of creature feature. And without going into too much detail, the same sort of thing happened again. And there was a lot of changing behind the scenes. People that I'd sort of trusted moved on, and I got basically asked to do a creature feature and wrote the growth. And the whole thing with the growth was a sort of a protest sort of publication from my point of view. Sort of the inner punk in me was just, because I'd had such a negative experience with them. I was contracted to do two sort of creature feature books, and I just thought this is going to be the least creature feature book ever, because A, I know you're not going to read it, and B, I don't care. So
Yeah.
I'm going to write something. So consequently, what happens, and why, coming back to your point about it getting redone, was that I had to release it as, two novellas. Um, and I think it's a big ask getting people to read your work, as you'll know, as an indie. It's like there's
Yeah.
so much sort of friendly competition. There's so many good writers of a really high standard now, and so unique. And myself, there's so many books I want to get round to reading, and you just don't get round to it. And then you're asking that of other people to
Yeah.
then say, "Oh, by the way, there's a sequel." It's like, oh, you know. So the whole thing was, I then once I got the rights back, it allowed me to put both books together, both novellas together into sort of a novel length um, book, so that when people do pick up the growth now, that's it. They just read the complete sort of story.
Yeah.
And that's sort of important to me. I don't want to feel like I'm ripping people off. I'm realistic in people's sort of attention, that there are people who will read one book, and it will be years before they circle around and get to the second book if you're lucky. So
Yeah.
it allowed me to revisit it and sort of tweak it a little bit. Um, Getting my partner Laura, aka Cut Fingers, to do a cover for it. Getting Damien Casey to sort of reformat it. So it's more of a sort of collective sort of um, attempt to right some wrongs, really. But
Yeah.
essentially, the growth is going back to your first thing. The growth is very much under the layers of it is a sort of social commentary of declining towns and what the growth does to wreck the towns and things like that. And the sort of infighting with the people that remain is sort of what goes on in my area of the world, where councils are sort of bleeding money out of places, and stripping the arts out of places, and giving themselves pay rises, while we're all just sort of, getting poorer in a way with the cost of living. And it was sort of that taken to the nth degree. So really the growth is a sort of environmental situation. Um, and some people got it, some people just see it for a creature feature, but I'm happy with it. I'm sort of happy with the journey it took me on, and it allowed me to write some characters that I'm particularly proud of.
Awesome. That's awesome. I'm glad you got to redo that. And like and having those experiences, the early, bad experiences with publishers, which I feel like that's, you talk about like there's so much to read because it really is an embarrassment of riches of indie authors out there right now. But there's also
Yeah,
like so many publishers who on the surface seem good,
yeah.
but I know you finally started, you have your own press going. Was a lot of that born out of like that frustration of dealing with those presses?
I think it's almost completely born out of that. Um, I think going with what I said with the growth and with not a good fit at this time, my first collection, because I sort of realised that there was sort of a team sort of assembling with Damien Casey's ability to edit and format and sort of he was doing the sort of e-publishing side of it for me, which I didn't really understand at first with KDP and things like that. And then obviously living with a very talented artist who was sort of doing the covers and sort of wanting to sort of get involved more. Just there was like it was mainly that, but it was also seeing people who authors that I admired sort of falling into the same sort of traps, if you will, that I had early on.
Yeah.
Where like you say things seem good and then you start seeing AI art and you start seeing a complete lack of promotion and you start seeing author announcements of like 40 a week and you start getting that bad feeling and basically Infested is sort of born out of wanting to right some wrongs, but I don't really initially it was to sort of self-publish, but I would much rather publish my own things through sort of publishers that I admire and trust. Infested is more like a collective, a gift to sort of other authors that I'm a fan of and that I think they deserve more. And I hope it can become the sort of platform of like trust where the people know they're going to get a good quality product with the right sort of writers. There could be no sort of problematic people, um, and just a sort of safe place for writers really and editors and artists and just a sort of positive thing to sort of a small little fight against all the negativity which won't go away. They're like weeds, but yeah, that's the main thing. It's just righting some wrongs, really, Elford, and we're not, and we're only small, and we're not, we're not sort of we have a business plan. We sort of we're realistic with small little baby steps, and if eventually we sort of get to a place where we can really boost someone sort of career wise, then that'd be great for us. We're not in it to make money. We're expecting to lose money. And people are like, well, what kind of sort of business sense is that? There's no business sense in it's an art movement.
Yeah.
It's more sort of similar to sort of the small record labels that popped up during the punk era. It's more about for the love of the art and getting it to the sort of into the sort of heart and soul of the reader. It's getting it out there. It's not so much, we're going to take most of the money and things like that. The money will just go back into making better covers and using better editors and promotional tools, really.
And you
Um,
have an anthology coming out soon, like your first Infested anthology.
yeah, that's been a strange experience for me, especially it's kind of overlapped a period that hasn't been so great for me on a personal sort of writing level with a lot of inactivity and a lot of stuff going on in my personal life that's just sort of affected it. So it's been a bit of a sort of palate cleanser um, because it very much feels like, going back to what I'm saying there about sort of giving giving people a bit of excitement and even down to, a prompt that sort of got people sort of creative juices going and appeal to them, something a bit different. And then the actual quality of submissions we got, um, you know, for months, myself and Laura have just, had story after story to just like enjoy. Because at first it was like, right, we're going to do 8, and then it was like, no, we're going to have to do 10, and then it was like, should we do? And it was like, you know what, we know 10 because it's going to be like a 50-story sort of anthology if we're not careful. So I had to make a lot of difficult decisions. It was sort of it was difficult. It felt like working on the shop floor all your life, and then next thing you're the sort of supervisor and you're having to make those tough
Yeah.
decisions and be like, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to let you go. And I felt a bit of a traitor at times. Certainly, writers that I admire, who I regard as friends, having to sort of reject their stories.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, it's, I've discovered so many writers that, I would say I'm a fan of now, where, I'm gonna have to seek out more of the work, because so many voices that are so distinct out there, that just absolutely crazy how talented some people are. So that's been the great thing for us. Um,
I mean,
and
looking at
that's
the table of contents, like it was a lot of like, I don't know. I'm not familiar with most of these
Yeah,
authors. So it is an exciting thing of like, oh, these all new voices almost.
yeah. Well, that was like an important sort of decision we made sort of early on. I think with the contacts that I sort of have, I feel like I could have, got like 8 authors with quite strong followings, and then just like sort of opened it for 2 spaces or something like that. But it felt kind of disingenuous to me, to do that. I think that happens a lot, and that's great. But I don't want to sort of a conveyor belt of the same sort of 20 names. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, you're going to get probably more readers, but I like sort of, let's give some more people a try now. You know, I think there are some people that have done quite well in RTOC, but in the main, it's sort of, you know, some incredible stories. Damien Casey is editing it currently, and I know he's enjoying that experience. Sort of the strength of the stories, the way that it was approached, is just fascinating, really. Um, for any sort of reader. So we're hoping it does well. We're hoping it does well for them, and obviously, any money that's made is just going to go into, boosting, um, the next sort of writers that we take on. I don't think we'll be doing an anthology for a long time now.
Yeah.
I get why publishers are a bit like, no, we're okay. I think, this isn't much to sort of give people confidence in us, as for us to gain confidence, like that we actually do we know what we're doing, um, and then we can sort of be at our very best for our sort of first crop of writers that we take on.
Yeah, it's always like I've talked to so many writers on here that have done anthologies, and they'll whether it was a rewarding experience or whether they were like, I'll never do it again, that are still like, I'll probably never do it again. So I'm always amazed whenever I see some people that are just like I feel like every week, like Gabino Iglesias is on Twitter being like, hey, does somebody want me to edit this kind of anthology? Like,
Yeah,
like
and every single one you're like, I would love to be in that.
it's always a great idea. It's always like it's like, oh, that sounds fantastic. I'd read
Yeah,
that.
yeah, 100%. But that's the thing. I mean, I suppose it's a different experience when you've got someone like, if you have a name like Gabino, behind it, then, that's going to get some eyes on it straight away. Uh, but from a writing point of view, I let a lot go by. Um, and funny enough, when I was in a writing slump, that was the first time that I wrote some short stories, to actually submit, because I've just been letting them pass me by. I don't get enough time writing.
Yeah,
It's either I'm writing short stories or I'm trying to write a novella. I can't do both at the same time.
yeah,
But because I sort of shelled my plans, I did write, a bunch, like I think 4 or 5 short
Oh,
stories for
good.
things.
Nice.
Um, so yeah, it's kind of working out. I think I've got one. I mean, don't get me wrong, they all got rejected.
Well, I mean, that's yeah.
But the thing is, I think I've got one still, sort of one or two still live out there, still holding on. Um, but everyone that's come back because of they've been quite unique for me. It's just it, I already know that there's going to be like probably another collection by me next year because of
Awesome.
I'm going to be like halfway there with what sort of comes back.
Oh yeah, like and honestly, I haven't been submitting short stories to anthologies myself. But yeah, for a while there, that was I was doing that constantly, and it really is like for every story that made it into an anthology, it was like 10 people said no, 10 places said no, one
Yeah,
place said yes, and it's just and it really is like it's like a persistence game. You just got to keep going, but at the same time, it
yeah,
can wear you down. Like I'm
yeah. I
always
think
amazed when someone's like, "Oh, people rejected this 50 times, and I finally got a thing." It's like I feel like after
yeah,
like 10, I'm like, "Is this garbage? Should I just throw this away?" And it's always admire the persistence.
yeah. I find putting the emails together exhausting. I always feel like am I saying the right thing? Am I saying the wrong thing? Um, I just people that just manage to sort of because a lot of the writers that sort of got in touch with us, just that's all they do. They just do short stories and they just publish and they publish like dozens and dozens and dozens, and you're like, wow, fair play. But I find it a lot like I think we're writing a novel or a novella. It's like takes a lot of time, and then you've just got to sort of do it a few times, and because you've already spent so much time in it, sort of getting a rejection back after 3 to 6 months, 12 months even is like, oh yeah, I'd forgot about that because I'm just carried on writing. Whereas I feel like submitting short stories, it's like when you're trying to get a job, it just feels like applying for jobs because you're
Yeah.
just like constantly sending like your CV out there, and
Mhm.
that's what it feels like. Is these stories because the ones I do are very sort of specific calls. I don't really have sort of like general horror ones or um, I think the only sort of ones that we sort of didn't really appreciate that got submitted to us were quite clearly just ones that they had already, and
Yeah.
they were just like trying to fit it, sort of squeeze it into the call. Um, I have my stuff. Just I wouldn't have a hope of doing that just straight away. It's very specific.
Yeah. Like I always try to like read the call, make sure it fits it exactly. And
Yeah,
that seems to be everyone's like that accepts these kind of stories. Number one thing is like read the call, read what we want.
yeah, yeah. It's crazy. I, obviously with our call, the main thing was that that the person writing it was supposed to die, or sort of if the story was told, the person who's sort of was telling the story through their eyes, whether being a narrator or everything through the main character's perspective, they had to die at some point. Where and the amount that we got were we'd get to the end, and Laura would be like, "They didn't die. They didn't die," and I'm just like, these conversations of like we were just like grumpy old people go, "Well, they didn't die, did they?"
I
And
looked at
some
the
of them were,
title of the anthology.
yeah, some
Oh
of them
no,
were
you died.
really, yeah, some of them were really, really good stories, and then that's all it was missing. But again, I think it was just people who are sort of make a career out of submitting short stories, so they just constantly sending these off, and I think you could tell the ones where people had specifically wrote it for this call, and it really sort of was shining through. Um, and the were the ones that we sort of really sort of leaned into.
And when's this anthology dropping? Is there an
Oh
official
God,
date yet?
oh God. Well, at this stage, all I can say is this year, and I say that with some trepidation. Um, yeah, like I say, it's being edited now. The kind of the covers sort of sorted, and um, it's just because yeah, because they sort of once you get to that stage of like actually physically putting it together, you know,
There's a lot
once
of
it,
work in that stage. Like,
I think it's because you know I'm not I'm fairly intelligent, but that process makes me feel like a caveman. You know, it
yeah.
makes me feel, you know, like an old man. You know, and in the past, Damien has shown such sort of resilience and patience with me when I'm like, you know, do I do this sort of thing? Do I do that? What do I click now? And you know, I feel like I'm on like IT support. So that's sort of what's holding me back, given a release date. Um, as soon as I know, it will go across all socials. But I didn't want to put any pressure on the editor, and I didn't want to
Yeah.
give any false promises to any of the writers involved. Uh, the main thing with me was that the writers all got paid straight away.
Oh,
Um,
awesome.
you know, that was the main thing. Um, the communication throughout the whole process, I hope the writers were happy with. If anything, they probably got too many sort of emails from us, sort of checking
I,
that things are okay. And
I think
um,
that's amazing because I feel like lack of communication is the worst when you're the writer on the end, where it's like, and I feel like so many issues that we've seen recently, it's like communication could have solved a lot of these problems.
yeah,
Like someone saying anything, really.
yeah,
Um,
and I think that's you know the experience that I've had and friends have had as writers of being sort of you know ghosted um, is such a soul crushing experience because when you write, it's you put so much of your heart and soul in it. It becomes so precious to you that I think we're all at a stage where it's you know mainly all of us where if someone doesn't like it, that's absolutely fine.
yeah,
But when someone is committed to actually publish it and then they just don't want to talk to you about it, it becomes sort of like a really toxic sort of atmosphere. And the one sort of thing that I've always prided myself on is a good level of communication. And that's what I've sort of not had from publishing experiences in the main. Um, so that's what I really, really have at the you know at the core of Infested. Um, it's something that Laura really sort of buys into. Is this you know as long as you're communicating, um, I don't think you can go wrong. You know because I think you know it allows you've got to allow the writer to be able to have a sort of open door where they can say, actually, I'm not happy about this. I'm not
yeah,
really, you know, I don't really like the look of that cover, or, you know, you don't want to have it where you're having to sort of build up a bit of courage to send an email to a publisher to say, can I just talk to you about this, please? And then they're just sort of not getting back to you or sort of being rude about that, as if like it's a sort of I'm the boss and you're the worker sort of relationship. Because Infested will never be that. Um, we will take those issues off you so you don't have to deal with them, but we certainly won't make you feel inadequate, you know, not important. We're only going to publish things that we're a fan of. You know, there's nothing worse with publishers where they're not even reading. The only person who reads the book is the person who they're paying to edit it or not
yeah,
paying to edit it. You know, I'm only going to deal myself now. I will only deal with someone who's an actual fan of the manuscript. If they don't, if I can't find anyone who's a fan of my work, then I'll just work harder to sort of get better. But I will not publish with someone who's like, oh yeah, I'll give you a 3 book deal, and they're not even reading it.
yeah.
It's you know,
Because it's like then
it's
on their end,
you know,
like, why are you doing this?
exactly. It's clear they're just thinking, you know, I think he might be able to get a few sales and I'll make a little bit of money because I'm getting 70, 80%, you know, and I just think from our point of view, you know, it's so upsetting and that's what they don't realize. it's your baby. And yeah, on the one hand, when reviewers are slagging it off, or people don't like it, it's like, oh, but okay, because there's plenty of books that people love that I don't. There's plenty of films that I don't like.
Yeah.
It's life. I don't care. There's plenty of people aren't going to like my work. But if it's someone who's saying, I want to publish you, who's being like that, it's like a horrible sort of toxic relationship. It's like
Yeah.
having sort of a weird ex who's like dealing with your stuff, and who wants that? But it's just
Nobody.
so common. It's so commonplace in the indie world. It's just like, and that's what we're about. It's become sort of, yeah, that's just something you have to put up with. And no, it isn't.
No,
Not anymore. It's
not.
not.
And
No way.
no, absolutely not. And yeah, I love that that's how you're approaching Infested. And
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to thanks again for coming on here. Like I appreciate it. This has been amazing.
No, thank you for having me on. Thanks for listening to me waffle on as I tend to do.
No, it was awesome. And yeah, anyone, listening or watching, check out Below Economic Thresholds. That's horror, sci-fi, class warfare of the best kind, and keep an eye out for Infested's first anthology.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.